So welcome to another segment of my mathematics videos as I continue to show you concepts in paper 1 of your trigonometry and ECZ exams. So we are going to look at basic trigonometric equations and how you can actually get to solve them. But of course the basic trigonometric equations you are going to be finding them in your paper 2. But of course this concept can later on be applied in your paper 1. So a quadrant, for example, when you have one revolution can actually be divided into 4 quadrants. What I mean, if you have a complete circle, you are able to divide it into 4 parts, and each part is what we are calling as being a quadrant. So we can also do the same under trigonometry. We can actually divide, when we divide a circle into, quadrants, there are 4 quadrants that can be formed. So let me show you what I mean so that you are able, to remember. So we can say from 0 degrees to 90 degrees, from 90 degrees to 180 degrees, and from 180 degrees to 270 degrees. Then you come back to the same starting point, 360 degrees. Remember, that's a 90, a 90, a 90, a 90, and that is what we are talking about. So if you remember, if the angles are between 0 and 90 degrees, they fall into what we call as being the first, this is what we call the first quadrant. I will just say the first quad. Angles between 90 and 180 fall into what we call the second quadrant, and angles between 180 and 270, they fall into the third quadrant. Then for angles between 270 and 360, they fall in the fourth quadrant. Now you remember what we told you about the trigonometric ratios, the trigonometric ratios that we are calling as being, given the initial SOHCAHTOA. In this case, I mean, the sine, the cos, and what we are calling as being the tangent in this case, or tan. So sine, cos, and tan. So these are the 3 trigonometric ratios that we have. So what you need to remember that in the first quadrant, all the 3 trigonometric ratios are positive. Therefore, we use a memory aid, all students, so all students take chemistry. So all students take chemistry. What do we mean? In this case, we mean all the trigonometric ratios, as long as the angles are between 0 and 90 degrees, they all are positive. So what I mean when I say that, I mean that when we talk about sine, when we talk about cos, and when we talk about tan, all these will give you positive values as long as angles are between 0 and 90. Then angles greater than 90 but less than 180, only sine is actually positive. So we mean when it comes to to sine, we mean cos, and we tangent, only sine will be positive, but the rest will give you a negative. Then in the third quadrant there, you are going to find that when we talk about sine, we talk about cos, and we talk about tan, it's only tan that is positive, the rest are negative. So when it comes to the fourth quadrant there, you are going to find that sine, cos, and tan, you are going to find that only cos is positive, but the rest are negative. No wonder there we are saying that all students take coffee, because in the first quadrant, for angles between 0 and 90, all of them are going to be giving you a positive. In the second quadrant, only sine is actually positive. Between angles 180 and 270, only tan is positive, the rest are negative. Between 270 and 360, only cos is positive, the rest are negative. And you need to to know the what each of these trigonometric ratios, are they positive or negative, where are they positive and where are they negative, because it will help you to answer some basic trigonometric equations. So let me show you how you can answer basic, trigonometric equations with this in mind. But of course, before we move on, I want to highlight a concept again that you need to remember about these trigonometric ratios. We can just again try to draw the quadrant so that I can show you how to get the angle in each of the quadrants that we have. So remember we said 0, 90, 180 and 270, then you come back to 360 degrees. So if you want to get the angles in the first quadrant, remember all students take coffee. If you want to get the angles in the first quadrant, it's very simple. If you know the angle in the first quadrant, you know the angle in the first quadrant, you can find the angle in the other quadrant. So how do you get the angle in the second quadrant if you know the angle in the first quadrant? Well, for you to do that, you just need to say it's 180 minus the angle in the first quadrant. That will give you the angle in the second quadrant. For example, if I know that here it is 30 degrees, then there the angle will be 180 degrees minus 30 degrees, which will give me 150. That is what we mean. For you to get the angle in the third quadrant, what you do is you say the angle in the first quadrant plus 180. So you just get that angle plus 180 degrees. So that will give you the angle in the third quadrant. That is what we mean. To get the angle in the fourth quadrant, you simply say 360 degrees minus the angle in the third quadrant. So this is what you need to remember, how to find the angle. So as long as you know the angle in the first quadrant, you can know the angle in the other quadrants that are remaining. That is what you need to remember. Now let me quickly show you what you need to do to find this basic trigonometric equation. So I've actually written you some steps that you can follow when finding solving for basic trigonometric equations. For example, to solve for a basic trigonometric equations such as sine theta is equal to k, the steps that you can take, the first step that you need to take is, first of all, you need to find the first the first quadrant angle. So what is the angle in the first quadrant? That is the first step. Step 2, find the quadrant in which theta will lie. Where is it going to lie or fall? Then step 3, we need to determine the corresponding angles for those quadrants. That is what we are going to do. Let's start with here. We show you how you can go about that. So I've got a series of questions that I'm going to look at. For example, they tell you solve the equation sine theta sine theta is equal to 0.5 and b sine theta is equal to negative 0.38 for angles between 0 and 360. So they have given you can pick up angles between 0 and 360. So that is a 1 revolution. So to solve such basic trigonometric equations, what you do, 1, we are going to say sine theta is equal to 0.57. Remember, our step is to find the angle in the first quadrant. So therefore, I'm going to say, how do I get this theta? It is going to be sine inverse of this value there, 0.5, So the angle in the first quadrant there, if you use your calculator, it is going to be sine inverse of 0.57. It is giving me 34. So angles are left to 1 decimal place. So this is giving me, 34.8 degrees. So once you find the angle in the first quadrant, remember, step 2 says find the quadrant in which theta must lie. So let's draw those quadrants we talked about there. Remember, from 0 to 90 degrees, there, 280 degrees, 270, and we come back to 360 there. So in the first quadrant, we said all students take chemistry. It simply means that when you get the angle in the first quadrant, which we have gotten here, where is sine positive? Because this value that you have is positive, so you need to ask yourself, where is sine positive? Remember, in the first quadrant, sine is positive, and also in the second quadrant. So my angles are going to come from the first quadrant and the second quadrant. So already you have the angle in the first quadrant, which is 34.8. So how do you get the angle in the second quadrant? Remember, you can also get theta by simply saying it is simply 180 minus the angle in the first quadrant, which is 34.8. So what is that going to give you? So it is going to be 180 minus 34.8. So this is going to give you 145.2 degrees. So therefore, my theta is going to be 34.8 degrees, the angle in the first quadrant, and it can be 145.2 degrees. That's the angle in the second quadrant. Why? Because sine is positive in these two quadrants there. So that is the way you can go about, solving that. All right. So let's look at another one, the B part there that we do have. Let's look at the B part there that we have. So the B part there says that we solve. So B says, sine theta is equal to negative 0.38. But you notice the value that I'm having here, it is having a negative. So you can ignore, first of all, the negative by finding the angle in the first quadrant. So theta will be equal to sine inverse of 0.38. That's what you do. You can ignore that negative, but that negative is very important. So it is going to be sine inverse of 0.38. What is that giving me? It is simply giving me 22.3 degrees. So this is the angle in the first quadrant. Now if you go back to your quadrant, where will the angle theta lie? Where would it lie? So if you notice, all students take chemistry from 0 to 90 degrees, 180, 270, and we come back to 360. Now because there's a negative here, if you notice, let me use a different marker. Because there's a negative, it is telling you you are getting your angles where sine is negative. So where is sine negative? We know in the first and in the second, sine is positive, but where is sine negative? It is simply in the third and also in the fourth quadrant. So how do we get the angles in the third and in the fourth quadrant? Remember, we know the angle in the first quadrant there, which is 22.3 degrees. So how do we get, in the second and in the third? So therefore, to get in the third, let me say, in the third quadrant, theta will be equal to, remember we said you add, it is simply, the angle in the first quadrant, 22.3 plus 180 degrees. So what is that going to give us? 22.3 plus 180, and that will give us a 202.3 degrees. How do I get the angle in the third quadrant? Of course, for you to get the angle, in the fourth quadrant, it is simply 360 minus the angle in the first quadrant, which is 22.3 degrees. So what is that going to give us? 360 minus 22.3 there. So it is going to give us 337.7 degrees. So therefore, my angles where sine is negative is simply, 202.3 degrees and 337.7 degrees. So these are the solutions, the two angles. Please remember, when you have a negative, they are telling you get your angles where sine is negative. So sine is negative in the third and in the fourth quadrant. That is where our solutions lie. And according to what they have told us, the angles is simply between 0 and 360 there. So that is what they are telling us there. Let me put up just some other questions so that I can just help you, so that you are able to see. Now suppose I give you something that looks something like this. I tell you to say solve the equation. So I want you to solve the equation A, cos theta is equal to 0.5, and B, I tell you that cos theta is equal to negative 0.3814, and let me say tan theta is equal to 1.25, and I give you the range 0 degrees should be less or equal to theta, and theta should be less or equal to 360 degrees. So how can you go about that? Well, the first one there is simple as well. They have given you cos theta is equal to 0.5. So what you do, find the angle in the first quadrant. So theta will be equal to cos inverse of 0.5. And if you look at cos inverse of 0.5, so cos inverse of 0.5 to give me 60 degrees. Now, because this is positive, they are telling you, where are you getting your angles? It is where cos is positive. So all students take chemistry. Now, where is cos positive? Yes, it's in the first quadrant and in the last quadrant. Therefore, I've already gotten the angle in the first quadrant. How do I get the angle in the fourth quadrant? It is 360 degrees minus 60, which is going to give me a 300. Therefore, my angles will be 60 degrees and 300 and 300 degrees. So that's the way you can solve that. Right, let's look at the B part. The B part there says that, they have given you cos theta is equal to negative 0.3814. Remember what I told you? In the meantime, you can ignore the negative and find the angle in the first quadrant. So it will be cos inverse of 0.3814. So what is that going to give us? So cos inverse of 0.3814, and that is going to give us, the angles are left to one decimal place, so that is 67.6 degrees. Now, if you look at this one, let's go to our quadrant. All students take coffee. So where are you going to get your solution? Remember that again, the moment you see that negative, it is telling you you are getting where cos is negative. So in which quadrant is cos negative? Well, cos is negative in the second and in the third quadrant. That is where cos is negative, because in the first all of them are positive and cos in the fourth quadrant is positive. So your solutions will come from there. So now when you look at this one, how do I get the these angles? For example, this is in the second quadrant. How do I get the angle in the second quadrant? Remember we said you get the angle in the first quadrant, which we have found. We say 180, that is 180 minus 67.6, that is what we said. So it will be 180 minus 67.6. that will give me 112.4 degrees. How do I get the angle in the third quadrant? It is simply the angle we got in the first quadrant, which is 67.6 plus 180 degrees. So that is going to be 67.6 plus 180. So that will give us 240. That will give us 247.6 degrees. Therefore, the angles of my solution will be this one here, 112.4 degrees and 247.6 degrees. So these are the solutions that I have there. So that's the way you can simply, go about to answer, such. Let's conclude and look at, the C part there. So the C part there says they want us to solve, tan theta is equal to 1.25. Remember, they have given us that range. It is the one that is actually guiding you. So find the angle in the first quadrant. That is the first step. So theta will be equal to tan inverse of 1.25. So theta will be equal to, so if you look at that, so shift and tan of 1.25. So it is giving me, 51.3 degrees. So this is the angle in the first quadrant. So I'll go, where do my angles lie? All students take chemistry. Remember, this is positive. So where tan is positive, that's where you are getting your solution. In the first quadrant automatically and in the third quadrant. So the angle in the first quadrant is the one that we got. So how do I get the angle in the third quadrant? So theta will be, you just say 51.3, the angle in the first quadrant, plus 180 degrees. So it will be 51.3 plus 180, which will give us 231.3 degrees. Therefore, my angles will be 51.3 degrees and 231.3 degrees. Please watch out in my next video as I show you more practice questions on how to solve these basic trigonometric equations. Thank you so much for watching.